we've got multiple things we're going to cover. Number one are trust issues with the listing. And when I say trust issues, I'm not meaning like client to us trust. I mean like having a revocable living trust or holding title in your trust, and issues that can come up down the line when people pass, and like what to shore up and make sure of with the listing, because when you take a listing and somebody has a property in a trust, you want to make sure you do a title search. In fact, on any listing, like the importance of doing a title search and reading the preliminary title report, because the story I'm going to share with you about why this is important is one for the decades, yet semi-common. So we're also going to be talking about like dealing with out-of-state or out-of-country sellers or buyers, you know, people that are either on travel or living elsewhere, how to coordinate and deal, which is going to kind of also softly move us into chatting about Stacy's listing that she has right now. She got referred to her from another agent. And there's also a topic where CAR has actually issued an email with some clarity, or maybe it was a social post, but sellers backing out of real estate contracts is starting to become a hot topic with the legal hotline with CAR. And it's where a seller signs a listing agreement, gets the house on the market, they're such in a hurry, they want to sell their home, they get it into contract, and then for whatever reason, they decide they want to back out and not sell anymore and think that there's no consequences. Okay, so 4 pieces we're going to hit: trust issues, out of state or out of country sellers, Stacy's listing, and sellers backing out of a transaction midway, like what to do. And it's very important because there's things that I want you to glean from today that are going to help you prevent this from biting you or your client in the rear by asking additional questions during the interview process so that you can figure out whether this listing is worth taking and what to prepare your clients for so that it doesn't turn into a horrendous situation like some of these I'm going to share with you. All right. You know what? I'm going to stand up because I've been sitting most of the day. All right. So first things first is with trust issues. Whenever you're taking a listing, make sure that you open a pre-escrow, which I know is standard practice for most of us on here right now. It's just part of the process. When you take a listing, you open a pre-escrow. I myself have even been lazy about reading the preliminary title report. Like, it's usually, I've read thousands and thousands of them, and I just take it, throw it in the file, take it, throw it in the file. Well, what I'm about to share with you, this story about a property we're in contract with that's looking like it may or may not actually close, is why I'm going, ooh, stark reminder of not only opening the pre-escrow, but how important it is to actually read the prelim and look at what liens are on title and the history or chain of title ownership. Okay. Here's the story of why this is one of many things that can happen, but it really brought this stark reality to the forefront. So our clients got pre-approved. They shop for a home, they get in contract, they're in contract. 3 weeks into escrow, one of the sellers died. That's already a not fun situation to deal with. It's horrible. The people on the other side are grieving on top of trying to figure out how to proceed. Okay. Here's where it gets even stickier. So there was a trust back in the day where, let's just say, man was married to woman years and years ago. They had a living trust. Woman passes away. Man continues living. Man gets remarried. Now we're in this transaction, and 3 weeks into it, man passes away. Mind you, when man remarried, he got a living trust set up with current wife. So you have trust A and trust B. Here's what you need to understand. So whenever you hold title to a property and you put it into a living trust, which, by the way, everyone in California, if you own a property or you have any kind of significance of wealth, and I mean, do you have more than $10,000 or $30,000 to your name? Collectively, get a living trust. Because going through the probate process is expensive, it's arduous, and it just costs way more time, energy, and money than it's worth to just default to the state of California laws. Having a living trust allows you to put all of your bank accounts, your assets, your everything. But you need to make sure that, and by the way, I'm not giving legal advice. I am not a trust attorney. Go see a trust attorney, but I understand enough about this stuff to be dangerous. When you set up a living trust, you need to make sure that your bank accounts, all of your checking, savings, retirement, everything, you also fill out forms with the bank accounts to do what they require for your assets to be held in the living trust. Because we've had issues where we've heard about where, people had a living trust, they noted their bank accounts in the folder of the living trust, but didn't update their bank records. And the bank records were still old, stale beneficiaries from maybe a marriage or two before. Or worse, some unscrupulous person put their name on the account, taking advantage of people and stealing their money. So at the bank level, you got to make sure that documents are filled out to put those bank accounts into your trust. And your property that your clients own or you own, put it into a living trust by going and recording a grant deed, deeding the property into the living trust. If you don't do that, it may not qualify for being held in the living trust, and you may still have to go through probate. Okay, so getting a living trust is one thing. And this story, which made it really important to pay attention to, is living trust A was established when man and previous wife were married. Wife passes away. Husband gets remarried, sets up new living trust B. Does the proper paperwork to record living trust B, property into living trust B, and goes to the extent of getting a reverse mortgage. And the reverse mortgage lender puts the loan on it and leaves the property in living trust B. But here's the problem. Living trust A was never dissolved properly. So now what do you think happened? Living trust B thinks that they own the property. Living trust B went and encumbered the property, put a reverse mortgage on it. Husband passes away a week before closing. So the title company is looking at, okay, well, what do we need to do to make sure that we can insure the policy and close on this transaction? That's when they discovered there's a history of living trust A on this house. Living trust B, you don't have ownership. You don't have clear ownership. Can you please explain? Well, they've explained, but it doesn't resolve the fact that now living trust A and the heirs to living trust A say, well, then that's my house. Living trust B, you don't have the right to sell that house. That's my house. What? Now we have a dispute over who owns the house. And the facts are, because living trust A didn't dissolve, they actually have a legal claim to the property. Now this is turning into a legal dispute between the heirs of Trust A and the trustee, surviving spouse of Trust B.
Stepmom against kids. Oh, that's going to be ugly.
And let me tell you, they are not friends. They are not friendly. They don't like each other. So it is not going to go over easy. So lessons to learn from this. Number one, when you open a pre-escrow, which you should do for any listing that you've taken, read the prelim, look at the chain of history of title, and if you see that there's stuff to question, question it. Find out what's up.
When is that class on how to read a prelim?
Next Tuesday, not tomorrow, Tuesday. Tomorrow I'm doing listing agreement and the attachments for it. But the following Tuesday is when we're going to be discussing that. And you better believe I'll be asking some questions, because we're bringing in a title rep to explain that stuff. So how to ensure that this stuff is resolved? Because it's one thing to run into the problem. It's now, what do you do about the problem? Now, if and by the way, the funnier part, the prelim never showed up until a week before closing. That's how far behind the title company was. But it's in a remote area that always has these kind of problems where they just don't do anything fast. But whether it's a place like that or not, you as the professional have the ability to open pre-escrow, get a prelim from a company who will actually get it to you in a very quick amount of time. We usually get those within a day or two. Okay, we can get them as soon as we have a listing agreement signed. We can open pre-escrow and get that stuff handled, because sellers are not maliciously doing this stuff to try to mess things up. They just don't remember or didn't even know that they needed to dissolve Trust A at the same time as getting Trust B established. Had they done that, we wouldn't even be having this discussion or this training on it. Like, we would already be closed on that transaction and it would not be an issue. Okay. Now we're on the buying side, not the listing side.
Michael,
So for your listings, when you're looking at this, look at the chain of history. And if you see that it's being held in a trust, what question do you think I want you to ask them? Have you ever held property in a trust, or this property specifically in a different trust in the past? Okay. Because for those that have been married multiple times, there could be multiple trusts in the history that may or may not have been dissolved. Okay. And it's as simple as they sign it, notarize it, it's done, it's dissolved. Like, there's nothing more to settle once it's been cleared out and done. But if that didn't happen, it needs to happen. So like, if you take a listing agreement and in this kind of a situation, you see in the chain of history, wait a minute, I see your trust is on title. I see that you did a reverse mortgage a handful of years ago, but I also see there was a living trust predated to this. Can you tell me more about that? They will know and they will explain. And then you can simply ask, okay, great. Before we move forward, let's make sure we clear up anything on title. We need proof that that other trust was dissolved before you get into contract to sell your home, because title will not ensure the transaction is clear and that we know everybody has signed off who's supposed to. This is also a huge reason why having title insurance is so important, because this could turn into tens of thousands of dollars of lawsuit over claim of ownership on a property that has 5% equity. So it's not even like it's got a ton of equity or anything. So I want you guys to really, really, really ask questions, read the prelim, open pre-escrow, and then anything that you see in the title. And this could also be too, where you see solar liens, you see home improvement liens, you see a PACE or a HERO loan, you know, where like the clients have solar and they said that it was financed and then it was all paid off, but then you look at the preliminary title report and you're like, this is a PACE loan for that. And you can't get financing with a PACE loan. You got to pay the PACE loan off to get financing. Well, we need to talk about that. So this is why that title review, looking at the preliminary title report, is so important. And especially if you have clients who have been married in the past, might be a good idea to add to your list of questions to ask potential sellers when you're prepping for a listing. You know, have you ever been married before? Have you ever held this property in a trust or with another person in the past? Simple question, but with another person in the past might unveil that, you know, cousin Larry helped them buy the property and didn't sign off later on the sale because cousin Larry wasn't available, and somehow cousin Lou was able to sell the property without cousin Larry knowing. Sorry, Sharon, you got a weird guy in the background. So, I also have like all kinds of other stuff I was going to pop on the screen today about like questions to ask during listing interviews and things like that. We'll see if we get to it. It's 3:35 now and I have to end by 4. So I'm going to chat about some of the other topics, and we're going to chat about Stacy's listing, which may bring us into some of those slides I was prepared to share with you anyways. So what I'm going to do is first chat about sellers backing out of transactions. Okay. So the sellers backing out of transaction issue that we've been seeing commonly come up and been calling into the legal hotline about is when a seller, and this happens a lot. I mean, how often do we have a seller that's like, I need to hurry, I need to get it on the market, I need to get it on the market next week, like now, let's go. And they sign the listing agreement and they want you to hurry up and rush and put the cart in front of the horse and just put it on the market. Because they're in a hurry that they're going to lose money somehow. And then they do this, and then they find out, this is where the issue is huge. Sellers didn't have all their ducks in a row. So you know how I preach, start with the end game in mind and work backwards from there. Like, okay, cool, you want to sell your house, but where are you going to go? What are you doing with the money? Where are you going to end up? How are you going to finance it? Are you going to pay cash? Okay, great. What are the payments like? Well, is there a house that's reasonably priced where you want your payments to be before we do all this work and sell your home? Like, figure all those things out first, because whatever they're going to use the money for, you can ask more questions to percolate and make sure that you flush out issues that they could run into and what they need to watch out for before they commit to selling their home. This is where we go, time out. I'm not rushing you, and you can share stories like people passing away, not having their ducks in a row. Yeah, you might want that other property, but are you sure of what it actually costs to own that property? Have you ever lived in that area before? How much research have you done? Have you driven around there and spent much time there before you want to plant yourself there and think that you want to live there? Like, have you spent 4 seasons of the year there to know what it's like all year round? Are you comfortable with it snowing 2 to 20 feet and you can't get out of your house during the winter time? Like, does that work for your lifestyle? There's a lot of questions to ask to slow people down and go, hold on, until we know the end game, you have no business selling your house. Because if you do and you get it on the market and you go into contract and then you find out later that you don't really want to live there, you can't really afford it, it doesn't fit the budget, it doesn't fit your lifestyle, and all these other things that we need to flush out, and then you want to back out, you could face legal action from the buyer. The buyer could then sue you to sell you the house. The buyer then can sue you for damages, because if they can prove that they were in good faith wanting to buy your home, and they spent thousands of dollars on an appraisal, inspections, drawing up plans for construction. They put in their earnest money deposit. They locked their interest rate, and now interest rates are 1% higher. Sellers aren't necessarily thinking about those consequences, because how much more does it cost a borrower for a 1% higher interest rate over 30 years? You better trust and believe it's a lot. Tens of thousands of dollars, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if a buyer is like, wait a minute, I did all this because you promised to sell me your home. Now you want to back out because you didn't do your homework? I don't care. Pay me. You can pay me, because now you financially hurt me. And I can prove it, because when I went into contract and I locked in my interest rate, here's where interest rates were. And when you canceled on me, and now I got to go back to the market, interest rates are here, and that's what I got to go pay somewhere else. So you financially injured me, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. Now pay me. There's going to be lawsuits like this, if not already. And this is because sellers didn't get their ducks in a row, tried to put the cart in front of the horse, and now this is another story to share where sellers think that, well, you just, because in California, very hard to force a seller to sell their home. But there are ways to push for performance. There are CAR forms. There's legal help from the legal hotline. There's a notice to perform to tell the seller to perform the duties that they agreed to in that legally binding agreement. And if they don't, there's most likely mediation and arbitration to follow. And there could be consequences for that seller. So this is another reason to just be like, yo, sellers, time out. I know you're in a hurry to do this, but you need to figure these things out, because once you agree to sell your home and you get into a legally binding contract with a buyer, if you decide you want to back out, there could be consequences for you to face, legal and financial. So let's figure this out. Okay. So that kind of covers the rough overview of sellers backing out. And I'm watching time burn, so I'm going to let that one rest for now. Dealing with out-of-state or out-of-country sellers. So here's another thing, set of things to really think about. Number one, what is their time zone, and how are you going to coordinate communication? Meaning, from the initial let's get together and get to know each other to on a regular basis, how are we going to be able to communicate? You know, when I was in Africa, we were 11 hours ahead of our time zone here. So when California was 7 a.m. here, it was 6 p.m. in Africa. So when it was 11 p.m. in Africa, it was only noon in California time. So when everybody else was working during the day, I was CP time. So you got to coordinate that with your sellers, whether they're going on a trip, because that's one of the questions I always ask during when we're getting ready to go to the market. Seller, are you planning any trips or vacations? Yes, great. Where? Because if it's within our state, easy peasy. As soon as you cross state lines, now you need to coordinate, is it in a different time zone, and notaries. But what gets even more difficult is when the client is out of the country, whether it's short-term or long-term. Meaning, one of our clients who we helped buy a home almost 2 years ago got an amazing job opportunity to go live in Dubai. He now lives there. He has lived there since January. We're getting ready to close on the sale of his home that we helped him buy. And It's very fun trying to figure out a notary when the US consulate office says we're too booked up, you can't get an appointment for 2 weeks. This is where planning ahead is going to save your keisters. Okay. So number one, if you know your client's going to be out of the country, start working with the escrow officer or the title officer to find out what US consulate offices or where they can get notarization done while they're in that country. Because you may need to schedule that 3 weeks in advance or more to even get an appointment, and you may have to pre-schedule an appointment, which is fun because what if escrow is not ready to close by then? You can still get a grant deed signed at any time, and the title company can hold back having it recorded. So my advice to you to prepare for these kind of things is, as soon as you get into contract and you know what your timelines are looking like, and you know that it's going to be a 3-week out appointment for getting a notarization done, book it right away so that 21 days into your 30-day escrow, you already have an appointment with a notary that you know they can go sign seller docs with, because seller docs can be signed before the loan documents are prepared. And then the other documents that they need to sign that don't need to be notarized can be DocuSign. Okay. The grant deed, which is the transfer of ownership from the seller to the buyer, needs to be notarized. Okay. So that's one way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it is to have a specific power of attorney or a durable power of attorney that's accepted by the title company, where the seller has now given the right to somebody else to sign on their behalf while they're gone. That is another way to handle out of state or out of country sellers, whether they're on a short-term vacation or they've moved there or they are living there. Okay. So real important to do that stuff early in the game. There are other caveats, like we found out from the escrow officer who is phenomenal that we work with out of First American Title in San Jose, Margaret Anaya. She is phenomenal. She actually figured out a way that the title company will still insure the transaction to use an online mobile notary, which, by the way, is not legal yet in California. California, we're working on trying to pass legislation to make it legal. There's several other states that have online notaries that they can do for real estate all day, every day, no problem, which makes this a piece of cake if we had that kind of a setup in California, but we're still behind the times and it's not done yet. But what can happen is if the lender is okay with a modification to the title insurance, where the seller is signing an affidavit that acknowledges their use of an online mobile notary, and the lender who is doing the financing is also okay with the modification to the title insurance, ensuring the use of an online mobile notary for the seller to sign off. As long as all parties are in agreement with that, you can still close and use one of those online mobile notaries and do it here in California. Okay. But here's the thing. Lenders might be a bit sketched out on doing that. So you might run into that roadblock and it's not even a possibility, which is why you don't want to bank on that as a way to do it. You want to figure out before people are gone, or while people are gone, before you're going to put the home on the market and before you enter into a legally binding contract with a buyer, how are these important documents that must be notarized going to get signed? It's as simple as that. And there is probably 50 more ways to handle a situation like that. Okay. So there's actually a lot more too with dealing with out of area sellers to make life easier. But it's more of like a customer service thing. You know, what can you do to think as far ahead into the process and deal with things as early as you can to make their life easier and give them time to make decisions, i.e. a listing agreement. Here's the listing agreement. Take your time to review it. Let's schedule for the next day or two after this so we can review it together. Then we review it together and they're okay with it, or we need to make any changes. Then we send it to them for DocuSign. Okay? We're not rushing the process. Granted, you want to get a listing agreement signed as soon as possible. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Once you have the listing agreement, now it's time for the planning stages. If you know that they're, say, 13 hours ahead, like Stacy's client who's in the Philippines, well, if it's noon here, then it is 3 a.m. there. Okay? Because the easy way in the math is 12. Actually, so 13 hours. So I'm sorry. It's 1 a.m. there. Because noon to noon is 12 hours, right? 10 to 10, 12 hours. 9 to 9, 12 hours. But figure out those time zone differences and then figure out how you're going to adapt your schedule to work with them within the times they're available, because you might find they work during the day and they might only be open during short windows. And those short windows might leave you getting up at 2 in the morning to work with them. Stacy got up at 5 a.m. today to do that for her client. Okay. So, but it's, what's that?
And then he was busy. It's funny.
Right?
He's like, I'm retired. Call anytime. I'm like, we're 13 hours apart. It's not that simple.
Exactly. And then when she scheduled it and made the time and then like, wait, what? So, and those things are going to happen, but just know, like, choose who you want to work with. And when you do, be ready to be adaptable to what you need to do to make sure that you can communicate, because communication is huge. So when it comes to, we're going to be on the market, we're going to get offers in by this date. If I know my client's in a whole nother time zone, I'm buying an extra day or two for them to review offers, because I know from experience, if I have offers due by noon on Wednesday and I send them to my client after doing the review at, noon till 5 p.m. and I give them all my notes by 5 p.m. Well, 5 p.m. my time is 6 a.m. their time. And then maybe they get up at 6 a.m. to get ready for work and they go to work, and then they're not going to be able to look at those until 6 p.m. their time, which would be 5 a.m. my time. You see how things start to get wonky? So this is where just plan ahead and buy yourself more time. Let the people know, hey, offers are due by noon, but my client's 13 hours ahead in the Philippines, and they're not going to review offers for 24 to 48 hours. So don't give us any short expirations unless you want your offer to expire, because my client will take a day or two just to even get to it because of the time change. If you set the stage, things will fall into place beautifully. There's going to be people that don't listen, but that's okay. The cream will rise to the top and it's all going to work out. So pre-planning on that. Now we only have 8 minutes left, so I know we're definitely not going to get into the other things that I wanted to share with you, but we can always do it next Monday if we don't have other important, crazy stuff come up like this last week to share with you. So let's get into Stacy's listing opportunity in the Philippines. She was referred by a Hawaii agent who found her online. Kudos, Stacy, for doing your Google business page profile stuff. It works. So tell me where you're at with this. What any struggles up to this point? Things like what are your next steps? Like, fill me in.
So my biggest thing is just kind of nailing this guy down to do the workshop, because I wanted to find something. I went through like our Matrix Studio and I just looked for something like the why sell with E3, but it's just a pair like the PowerPoint. So I was hoping I could find something like the why buy guide that I could just send them, so they had like some nuggets of our process. But the nugget is the workshop. So I've got to just kind of nail him down and let him know. And I basically told him, I said, if we're going to take investors with us on Wednesday, you're probably going to want that listing agreement signed, because once we start putting things in motion for you, like that's got to be in play. And so he said, okay, I'll sign it before Wednesday so you can get the investors in. It's just been a matter of not being able to lay that part down yet. So that's kind of, I'm stuck.
Here's what I would do. Don't be showing it to investors on Wednesday.
Exactly.
Yep. So here's the thing. So
Hold it
until you have a
hostage to the
listing
agreement.
agreement, yeah, until you have a listing agreement, you have no agreement to be compensated. You have no employment contract.
Exactly. But
starting
I
there.
have, but technically I have my interview with his renters and going and seeing what the house actually is, right?
Which is fine to still do that.
Mm-hmm.
Use it as your way to gather info, because here's the thing. This person may or may not want to sell it to an investor off market. They might want to go to the market and make all the investors compete and get more money from the highest bidder who's willing to buy it with the tenant in place.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I'd find out, how long has the tenant been there?
A year or two.
Okay, so it's been more than a year, so they need a 60-day notice.
I told
Minimum.
him, and he wanted something with language that would say he wants language that would say if an investor buys it, that they have the opportunity to stay there. He wants to give them notice without necessarily giving them notice. He wants to also offer them the opportunity to buy without leaving money on the table.
So he wants a lot of
things going
different
on.
things. And what I'm hearing,
Is he needs a workshop and he needs to organize his thoughts.
yep, and he wants the most money.
Mm-hmm.
Most sellers want the most money. And then they think, well, let me just give it to an investor and then the tenant can stay and it's just going to be easier for me.
But investors aren't going to pay the most money ever.
Correct. And especially with a tenant that's been there for a year or two that may or may not be paying top dollar rent. So in my mind,
may
I've
not
already
have
got
a
like
mortgage.
20 more questions I want to ask this person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. How has the tenant been? Was there any delays on payment during COVID when the tenant was there? Like there's
No delay.
nothing?
He got them in there to help them out during COVID,
Okay.
but he charged them minimal rent,
Which does what to the value?
brings it down.
Exactly. Drives the value down, because bleeding hearts who do favors for other and give them below market rent. Like I see this time and time and time again, where good intention, goodwill given, then bites them in the rear later when they go to sell their home and wonder why it's $100,000 less that they're going to get because they gave somebody a $500 a month discount on the rent below market. And then want the tenant out, but then the tenant doesn't want to leave. Then you got to go through the eviction process that could take 3 to 6 months minimum or more. One of my clients who wanted to sign a listing agreement with me during the month of April of last year was not able to let me list their home. I mean, we could have had a listing agreement the whole time. We were not in a position to sell their home until September. Now, what happened between April last year and September to the market?
Oh, it fell apart.
Uh-huh.
Ugh.
And that was, mind you, a tenant that already hadn't paid for 15 months.
Was that the Frost listing? And hoarded.
Ding, ding. So when you have a tenant occupied situation, you got to slam the brakes on the seller. Like, seller, you don't understand. This is California. Tenants have a lot of rights. And here's some things you need to, and this is where you slow it down to break down the process of, okay, selling as is with tenant in place. Here's your scenario. Here's how we're seeing this play out.
How do I even run numbers for a scenario like that?
I guess we need to work together on it. There's market rent analysis to see what market rents are at. What are
Mhm.
they actually charging for rent, and applying those metrics to how it affects the value on the open market when they decide to sell it. So you can use math to help them come to reality of, oh, I thought I just would be able to put it on the market and sell it. Sure, you can. But when you're offering $500 a month lower rent to the current tenant in place, that means that all the buyers that want to buy this are not going to pay retail. They're going to take retail minus $80,000 to $100,000 because you took away $500 a month of income. It's that big of a difference? Yes, it is that big of a difference, because that's how much debt service that money could serve, which then drives your value back up. Oh, and by the way, if you have a buyer who doesn't want to keep those tenants, then they might only want to buy it if you're going to get them out. And if you don't give them notice early, good luck getting them out. Now you're stuck. Like, I honestly, like, with tenant occupied properties, if a seller can have it vacant unless they absolutely understand the mathematical consequences of not being able to show it in its most beautiful light, not being able to stage it, and having a tenant in place, like how catastrophic that is to the value. Like, it is a very large difference that is tens to sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars difference for option A, as is with tenant in place, must keep tenant, to option B, tenant is vacated and I still want to sell it as is, and I can get market rents for whoever's going to buy it. Or option C, tenants out, home is vacated, it's completely fixed up, staged, looking beautiful. You got top dollar, medium dollar, lowest dollar. And when you ask a client, well, how important is it to you to get top? Well, it is super important. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it is the most important thing to me, and 1 being I could care less about making top dollar, where are you at on the scale? If they say 7, 8, 9, or 10 on the scale of 1 to 10, it's pretty darn important to them. So that's even more reason to go, time out, slow down, hold on. Let's look at these scenarios so that we can really weigh out what's best for you. And there's a lot of things to share with them about how difficult it is to sell a property with a tenant in place. How fun is it to schedule showings with tenant occupied properties? How fun has that been for you guys?
How fun is it to show a property with the tenant that doesn't want to move, watching your every move in the house?
Okay.
God.
I could tell you that most tenants don't want to move. I don't want to be forced to move, so why would I expect somebody else to want to be forced to move? That's a crappy situation to be in. So, like, I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for tenants. And I represent my client, the seller, or the buyer. And either way, it being a clean slate is a more profitable situation, unless they want to buy it, hold on to it, let rents go up over time. Like, if somebody's offering, $500 or $1,000 a month below market rent, it could take 5 to 10 years with the annual increase allowance for you to finally catch up to this year's market rent. And then you're still a decade behind because rents will be that much higher by then anyways. Like, it's a very big issue that a lot of people don't take seriously. And what I'd like to do with you and your client is maybe even we do some of these appointments together so that I can flush out a lot of things on the fly in a very quick meeting with him of what he needs to think about and how it's going to affect him financially. If this tenant doesn't really want to leave and he doesn't give notice, then he does need to sell it with the tenant being able to stay. And if a buyer's not going to agree to it, then they don't get to buy the house. So he does have that right. Okay. He can market the home and say, I am not going to sell it to anybody who's not going to let this person stay. And it will affect his price, and by a lot, especially if it's below market. If it's full market rents, different story.
Okay.
But you already found out from him he's a very nice person and gave them a deal. So it's going to need to be fleshed out. And we're already past the 4 o'clock time. Let's see. And we're on for our 4:30, Stace.
Okay.
So Deb can hop on, so we can hop on there. So I'll send a Zoom invite to the both of them and you, so we can hop on there. And then with regard to your client in the Philippines, I've got to go immediately after our thing with Deb. When is your next communication with your client?
I was going to try and chat with him tonight, like
Okay.
9-10 o'clock at night. And just see, well, if they're 13 hours ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with him being retired, that's like a reasonable time to call someone, right? So
Yeah, because you figure, if it's 8 p.m. our time, it's 9 a.m. their time.
yeah. Well, 9
So-
o'clock is when my son goes to bed. So that's where it gets quiet in my house. And
There you go. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Stace, because you balance this with what works for you and his schedule. You know what I mean? That's where, you got to make it work, how to make it work. But first and foremost is getting to the listing agreement piece and explaining to him there's multiple options to consider here. And with the tenant in place, and especially, find out on Rentometer, Rentometer's how we look at where market rents are at. If market rents are $2,800 a month and he's rented them to $2,200 a month, that's a $600 a month difference. And remember, the average cost of financing is $800 a month. So 600 divided by 800 is going to be somewhere around 80% or $80,000 qualifying money. So if it's $200 a month below market rent, then it's going to be closer to about, $15,000-$20,000 difference in the hit, which it also removes all owner occupant buyers from the market. It is only investors that will buy it at that point, because no owner occupant can buy it unless the tenant's going to be out.
Yeah.
That is a massive hit to the amount of money he's going to make on the property. And he really needs to carefully decide whether he wants to sell it with the tenant in place or not. And then we can figure out the mathematical difference. And here's how you're going to buy time with this. You can't give him exact figures until we see the condition of the property, so that we can properly put together multiple options for him. The multiple options are going to be tenant occupied as is, tenant must stay. Sell it, maybe do some work to it if the tenant allows. And still, if tenant stays, that's another option, but it's not a great one. And tenant is vacated, you could still sell it as is, but now you've got owner occupant people competing against non-owner investor only. Or last, and certainly the most price worthy, is fix it up, stage it, sell it, let the owner occupant beat the pants off of investors and make him more money. But before he decides which direction to go, we're going to do our homework. The listing agreement is just, yeah.
I've already said all of that to him.
Okay,
That I'm going to go and check it out on Wednesday. And then we'll have multiple packages of what he can do and with different options and map all of those out for him. So we've already had that conversation. So he just hasn't had a seller workshop yet. I guess I shouldn't press that issue until at least Wednesday when I go to see it, right?
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, because the seller workshop is to prep them for things they need to understand and gain their trust to do a listing. Then the seller education piece comes into play, which we have a seller's guide. And in fact, we just revised our buyer workshop, seller workshop, seller's guide, and buyer's guide. and they are fire. We just put
Yeah.
some finishing touches on them today.
Oh, so that's why I couldn't find it in the Matrix Studio.
Correct. They're in
Okay.
Canva.
I was like, it's gone. That was so good.
Well, we have even better now.
Okay, good.
Yep, we have even better because tomorrow is listing agreement stuff for Agent Catapult. Next Tuesday is title and escrow and what lenders to ask, what questions to ask of lenders. Then the following Tuesday is either seller workshop, and then the following Tuesday is buyer workshop, and I'll be training to the new ones, but any seller or buyer workshops that we do between now and then, you're going to get to see them anyways, because I'm already using the new stuff with people.
Okay.
I might even bust it out with Deb today, but
Sweet.
I may just ask her a bunch of questions too.
Okay.
Coolio?
Cool. See you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. And the rest of yous, thank you for showing up. I hope you got some cool stuff from it. Later.